Okay, so this is chapter 8 of our textbook, the nervous system. And this is one of the topics that will be included in our final exam. So let us start our discussion. So the nervous system is divided into the CNS or the central nervous system and the PNS or the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. And this is where mainly the processing of information and impulses that ascends to our nervous system takes place. Now, while the peripheral nervous system is composed of the nerves to the face, namely the cranial nerves, the nerves to the upper limb, and the nerves to the lower limb, and the associated ganglia to those nerves. Now, by function, yung ating peripheral nervous system can be divided into its sensory division and its motor division. So as you can see, no, in this figure 8.2, okay, pinapakita yung two divisions of the PNS. So still in the middle, you have the central nervous system. Again, it's your brain and in the spinal cord. And then on both sides, you can see the divisions of the peripheral nervous system. Now, those nerves that we were talking about earlier. So those nerves in your peripheral nervous system, including their associated ganglia, is divided into the sensory division and your motor division. The sensory division provides sensory input to our nervous system via the sensory receptors. What are those sensory input? No? Light, sound, taste, smell, touch, temperature, pain, pressure, among others. No? So we can perceive or we can sense light through sensory receptors in our eyes. We can perceive or we can sense sound through the sensory receptors in our ears, while we can taste through the sensory receptors in our tongue, smell through the receptors in our nose, and touch through the receptors in our skin, and among others. Now, so as you can see, the main function of the sensory division is to provide sensory input to the nervous system, the central nervous system, particularly through its sensory receptors. While the motor division provides the motor output in the form of movement, changes in metabolism, heart rate, breathing rate, and others. Now, this output is provided through the two divisions of the motor, no? Or the two subdivisions of the motor division of the PNS. Ano yung dalawang divisions ng motor division? You have the somatic and the autonomic nervous system. No? Somatic pertaining to the voluntary motor output. No? Voluntary, meaning according to your will. No? Very good example of effectors that contracts voluntarily or that moves voluntarily are our skeletal muscles. Diba? That is why you can voluntarily contract your biceps, for example. And other skeletal muscles. We move our body according to our own will, because that's part of the somatic nervous system. Now, the other division of the motor division of the PNS is your autonomic nervous system. Autonomic, meaning automatic, or involuntary. That is why the effector organs of the autonomic nervous system are those muscles that contract on their own. No? We have no control over it. No? Those and ito yung other two types of muscle tissue. If you will recall, our discussion about muscle tissue, di ba? We have three types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle tissues. And as we have said, skeletal muscles, no, are under voluntary control, while cardiac and smooth muscles, and also glands, is under involuntary control. So therefore, they are controlled by our autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is further subdivided into sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. Okay, so later we will be discussing more of the sympathetic and parasympathetic division. Both sympathetic and parasympathetic division innervates the effector organs of the autonomic nervous system, such as the cardiac and the smooth muscles. And again, no, both of them will have the same output, which is movement, changes in metabolism, heart rate, breathing rate, and etc. So that's how our nervous system functions basically. And also remember, no, yung ating PNS is divided into the sensory division and your motor division. Okay? So as you can see, if you will look at the direction of the arrow, the sensory provides input, no? Meaning afferent, papasok, no? While the motor division provides output, meaning efferent, palabas. Okay, so therefore, if you will look at these nerves, no, some of these nerves of the PNS conducts impulses, no, going into the nervous system. Papasok, afferent, kasi they provide input. While some of these nerves also conducts impulses away of the nervous system. Palabas, meaning afferent. Kasi, yung sensory division is providing input while the motor division provides motor output. Okay, so again, that is how the nervous system functions. Now, okay, in our nervous system, no, in all of those divisions of the nervous system, you will find two kinds of cells. There are two kinds of cells, no, in the nervous system. Ano yun? Eto, okay, nandito. You have your neuron and your neuroglia or glial cells. Again, the two types of cells in the nervous system are neurons and your neuroglia or glial cells. So we will be discussing first yung neuron, no? And so, okay. So what you're seeing here in figure 8.3 is the basic structure of a neuron or a nerve cell, no, in our nervous system. What is the main function, no, of a nerve cell or a neuron in the nervous system? They are the conducting cells. No? They conduct impulses in our nervous system. And a neuron has two basic parts. What are the two basic parts of the neuron? You have the neuron cell body, no? Sometimes known as the soma. No? The neuron cell body, also known as the soma. No? Soma meaning body. Okay. Mhm. So this is where you will find, no, the nucleus. Okay? No? But unlike a eukaryotic cell that you have learned during the prelim, no, itong neuron, no, is different because it has many projections from the cell body. As you can see, ang dami niyang projections from the cell body. What are those projections? Okay. First, you have your dendrites, no? Okay? No? Second, you have your axon. Itong mahaba na to, no? That's your axon. No? Those are the two types of projections arising from a nerve cell. Now, what is the function of your dendrites? No? Dendrites are the receiving part of the neuron. No? Okay, ba tinawag na receiving? Because, no, They are the ones that receives impulses from the surrounding neurons, no, in the nervous system. Kasi in our nervous system, you have millions, no, of collections of neurons, no, magkakasama yan. Okay? And those neurons communicate by passing on impulses or action potential to each other. Okay? And when neurons pass on action potential to neighboring neurons, it is the dendrites, no, that receive the action potential. Siya yung nagre-receive ng action potential. And that is the reason why there are numerous dendrites arising from a neuron in order for it to be effective in receiving action potentials from neighboring neurons. Now, once it has received an action potential from a neighboring neuron, that impulse will be passed on to the cell body, no, for processing before it is conducted to the other projection, which is your axon. Ano naman ang function ng axon? The axon is a propagating part. Ang axon natin, propagating part of a neuron, meaning it propagates the action potential. Bakit siya yung kailangan mag-propagate? Because it is the axon that travels, no, or that projects to other parts of the nervous system. Di ba? In our sa nervous system, no, yung mga action potentials has to be propagated, or conducted to other parts of the nervous system. Like for example, in order for the tip of the finger to feel a touch sensation, di ba? Yung action potential from the sensory receptors of the tip of your finger has to conduct that action potential to the sensory division of your peripheral nervous system, papasok, paakyat hanggang dun makarating sa ating brain so that it can be interpreted by your brain. Di ba? So it is actually an axon that makes up, yung ating mga peripheral nerves is actually made up of bundles of axon. So yun ang function, ng axons natin. It propagates the action potential, that travels going to other parts of the nervous system. Okay? So as a summary, you have two main parts, of a neuron or a nerve cell. First, you have your neuron cell body and the two types of projections arising from the cell body. You have your dendrites and your axon. Your dendrites are the receiving parts, while your axon is the propagating part of the neuron. Now, axons can be classified into three. We have three types, of axons, rather, neurons. We have three types of neurons. It can be classified according to structure. Okay, so you have first, you have a multipolar, you have a bipolar, and a pseudo-unipolar neuron. A multipolar neuron, just like what you see in the picture, okay, has many dendrites and one axon. Hence, it is called multipolar because it has many projections arising from the cell body. And as you can see, yung example natin of the neuron that we used, when we were discussing about the basic parts is actually a multipolar neuron. Kasi it has many dendrites and one axon. So ayan ang multipolar neuron. And most of the motor neurons, that we found in our central nervous system are actually multipolar neurons. Ganyan ang itsura nila. And then the second type of neuron according to structure is a bipolar neuron. It is called bipolar because you only have two processes, projecting from the cell body. You have one dendrite and one axon. Okay, so just the same, it is the dendrite that receives the impulses from the surrounding neurons, and then transmit it into the cell body, while it is the axon that will propagate that impulse or action potential to the other parts of the nervous system. Okay? And then the third part, or the third type, no, of neuron is called a pseudo-unipolar neuron. Pseudo means false, no? Okay? Because, no, this pseudo-unipolar neuron, okay, appears to have an axon but has no dendrites, no? Kaya tinawag siyang pseudo-unipolar. Okay? So here, wala talaga siyang dendrites. It just have, no? Okay? Uh, uh, a single, no? A single axon, and then that axon has sensory receptors on its one end, and yung other end niya will travel, no? Going to the other parts of the nervous system that will propagate, no? Those action potentials that are received by the sensory receptors. Okay? So again, those are the three types of neurons in our nervous system. Now, let us go to the uh, glial cells naman. As we have said earlier, di ba? We have two types of cells in our nervous system. First, you have your neuron na natapos na natin, multipolar, bipolar, and pseudo-unipolar. And here is the summary, no, of these three types of neurons, no? Kindly take note of the functions, no? I will no longer discuss this, but take note of the functions of those three types of neurons. Now we will go to the glial cells, no? Or the neuroglia, no? Of the central of the nervous system. Okay. So when we say glial cells, these are the supporting cells, no, of the nervous system. They do not conduct action potentials, but they enhance, no, the conducting capacity of our nervous system, of our nerve cells rather, no? They enhance the conducting capacity of our nerve cells. And we have glial cells in the CNS, in the central nervous system, and we also have glial cells in our peripheral nervous system. Okay? So, these are the glial cells in the CNS. O, ito yung unahin natin. Astrocytes, ependymal cells, microglia, and oligodendrocytes. No? Astrocytes, ependymal cells, microglia, and oligodendrocytes. So what are astrocytes? Ito yan. These are your astrocytes. Okay? They are called astrocytes because of their shape. They are star-shaped. Okay? And astrocytes are considered as the main supporting cells, no, of the central nervous system. Okay? And as you can see, no, they have foot processes that wraps around, no, the capillaries of the brain. Okay? They wrap around the capillaries of the brain because one of their functions is to form the blood-brain barrier. Now, if we will go back, no, at the table, okay, one of the functions is to form the blood-brain barrier. Oh, so what is the blood-brain barrier? The blood-brain barrier is like a membrane that filters, or that selectively filters, the chemicals that can enter the brain circulation. Because not all chemicals can enter the brain circulation. Okay? So therefore, in order for a drug to have its effect to the central nervous system, yung mga tinatawag na centrally acting drug, in order for a drug to have its effect to the brain, to the central nervous system, it must be able to pass through the blood-brain barrier, okay? Which is again formed by the astrocytes. No? Aside from that, what are the other functions of the astrocytes? to provide structural support, to regulate neuronal signaling, and to help with neural tissue repair. Okay, let's go to the next. The next one are your ependymal cells. As you can see, ependymal cells are epithelial-like cells. Kung titingnan mo nga siya, para siyang simple cuboidal epithelium. Di ba? Ang itsura niya. And it has cilia on its surface. Ciliated siya on its surface. So what is the function of your ependymal cells? Ependymal cells, no, are found within the ventricles of the brain and in the central canal of the spinal cord. Okay? Oh, what do you find in the ventricles of the brain? The ventricles of the brain are filled with fluid, no? Na cerebrospinal fluid. And the main function of the ependymal cells, no, is to help, no, aid in the circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. That's the reason why, no, it has cilia on its surface. Yung cilia na yan produces, no, yung flow, no, of the cerebrospinal fluid. No? And some of these ependymal cells also form the choroid plexuses, no, that are found inside the ventricles of the brain. And these choroid plexuses produce the cerebrospinal fluid. So we're done with astrocytes and ependymal cells. Let's go to the third one, which is your microglia. So nasa na microglia? Microglia, ito, no? These are small mobile cells. Meaning mobile, they can move. They can move from one part of the central nervous system to another part. No? Why? Because, no, they are actually derived, no, from our white blood cells, particularly from our macrophages. And you have to remember, no, from your circulatory system, particularly yung blood natin, yung discussion natin, no, white blood cells can move, no? Okay? No? And macrophages are the ones that perform phagocytosis. And since the microglia are derived from the macrophages, therefore, the microglia can also perform phagocytosis. Yun nga lang, exclusively in the central nervous system. So therefore, no, since they are derived from the white blood cells, they can protect the central nervous system from infection. No? In cases of infections, they become phagocytic or phagocytic. Oh, sabi ko nga kanina, they perform phagocytosis. And in some neuroanatomy books, the microglia is labeled as the scavengers of the central nervous system because they phagocytize cellular debris, no, and bacteria. Tagalinis sila ng central nervous system. Now, next is your oligodendrocyte. Ayan. So this is the last, no, in the central nervous system. Your oligodendrocyte. Oh, oligodendrocytes, no, functions to produce myelin sheath. Okay, in the nervous system. No, they produce myelin sheath in the nervous system. Now, when where do you find the myelin sheath? Myelin sheath, no, are found wrapping around the axons of the central nervous system. That's why if you will look at this illustration, no, your oligodendrocytes, no, your oligodendrocytes are the ones that produce myelin sheath. Kaya makita ninyo, no, yung mga axons, no, in the nervous system are enclosed, no, within a myelin sheath. When an axon is wrapped around the myelin sheath, it is classified as myelinated, no? Okay? Ngayon, when an axon, no, is unmyelinated, it is simply wrapped around by uh, Schwann cells. No? It is simply wrapped around by Schwann cells rather than by myelin sheath. Okay, so let us continue. So those are the glial cells found in your central nervous system. Now, how about in the PNS? You have your Schwann cells and your satellite cells. Okay, na-mention na natin kanina yung Schwann cells. No? Yung Schwann cells can wrap around, no? Wrap around those unmyelinated axons. Aside from that, Schwann cells also are the ones that produce myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system. Kung sa central nervous system, it is oligodendrocytes. In the peripheral nervous system, it is the myelin sheath that produce, it is the Schwann cell that produce myelin sheath. So the last glial cell in the PNS are your satellite cells. No? Okay? Satellite cells also provide support to the neurons. They provide nutrients and they protect our neurons from heavy metal. So take note of this table, no? Because table 8.1 summarizes the description and functions of the two main cell types in the nervous system, your neuron and your neuroglia, or the glial cells. Okay, so we are finished basically with the general organization in the nervous system. So let us now discuss uh, how uh, impulses, no, are transmitted, no, across our nervous system. O paano nga ba na ita-transmit, no, ang impulses across our nervous system, no? It is transmitted or conducted in the form of action potentials. As we have said earlier, the receiving portion or the receiving part of the neuron are the dendrites, di ba? Papasok doon sa cell body. And then, no, the propagating part of the neuron is your axon. The axon conducts the action potential to the different parts of the neuron. And that action potential, no, or those impulses travel in the form of action potentials. And action potentials is a result of the changes, no, in the changes in the uh, charge, no, electrical charge across the cell membrane, di ba? If you will recall, no, if you will recall, in our discussion of our cell, no, we have mentioned, di ba, that the cell is selectively permeable, no? So ibig sabihin, or the cell membrane is selectively permeable. Ang sabi natin, di ba, the cell some substances, no, are allowed to pass through while some substances are not allowed to pass through, no? As a result, there can be concentration of some substances outside and concentration of some substances inside the cell. And that is true in the case of ions, no? Like for example, sodium, no? At saka itong potassium, for example, no? Kasama ang sodium and potassium, no, doon sa mga ano yun, ions, no? Okay, that the cell, no, can selectively allow to diffuse across the cell membrane. No? Okay? So, as you can see, no, there is greater when the cell is not yet stimulated, particularly the nerve cell, when the cell is not yet stimulated, there is higher concentration of potassium inside the cell, while there is higher sodium concentration in outside of the cell. Mas maraming sodium sa mas maraming sodium sa labas kaysa sa loob. Okay? Because if you will recall, you have your sodium, potassium pump na which does the piso. Oh, ano yung piso? Ito yun eh. Yan yung piso. Oh, potassium in, sodium out. That is why initially, no, there are more potassium inside the cell and more sodium outside the cell because of this potassium in, sodium out. Piso. Pero you have to remember, aside from that sodium-potassium exchange pump present in the cell membrane, you also have potassium leakage channels. No? Itong mga potassium leakage channels na to allows potassium to move out of the cell. So therefore, no, yung mga naipasok ni piso pwede ring makalabas because of the potassium leakage channel. Ang resulta, pag lumabas ang potassium, ang maiiwan sa loob ay mga negative proteins, resulting now to the resting membrane potential of the nerve cell that is negative inside and that is more positive outside. No? Negative inside and positive outside. Yun, no? Ang resting membrane potential. And if we will measure how negative is the charge inside of a resting nerve cell, it is said to be equivalent to negative 70 millivolts. Negative 70 millivolts. Okay? Again, that is the resting membrane potential. Ngayon, when an action potential arrives, when an action potential arrives, in the cell membrane, okay, some of the voltage gated channels, katulad nito, ayan, pag may dumating na action potential, katulad na sinabi natin kanina, anong resting membrane potential? Negative 70 millivolts. When an action potential arrives, okay, some of those closed sodium channels. Initially, ang mga sodium channels nakasara yan eh. But when an action potential arrives, sodium channels will open. When sodium channels open, it will result to the influx of sodium ions. Di ba maraming sodium sa labas eh. Sabi natin during the resting membrane potential, mas maraming sodium sa labas kaysa sa loob. So therefore, when sodium channels are open or opened, it will result to sudden influx of sodium. Papasok yan. Di ba? Kung kanina, negative 70, biglang pumasok ang sodium which is positive. Di ba? Sodium is positive. Papasok yan sa loob. Ano mangyayari ngayon? Doon sa membrane potential inside the cell. From being negative, it will become positive. Again, because of the entry of positive sodium ions. That's why if you will look at the graph, di ba? Tumaas na yung graph. Naging positive na siya. And that change of the potential of the inside of the cell membrane from being negative to become positive is called depolarization. Okay? Now, when the sodium channels close, just like what you see here in the third step, When the sodium channels closed, what will remain open are your potassium channels. No? Ano mangyayari pagka bumukas naman ng potassium channels? More and more potassium will diffuse out of the cell. Palabas naman ngayon ng potassium. No? At pag nakalabas ang potassium, what will remain inside are again negative proteins. Kung maiiwan sa loob ay negative proteins, di ba? From positive, what will happen to the charge of the inside of the cell? It will again become negative. And the change in the potential of the cell from being positive going back to negative is called repolarization. So those are the three phases of the action potential. It starts with the resting membrane potential, which is around negative 70 millivolts. Then when the sodium channel opens, there will be sodium influx, which will result to depolarization. And then, after depolarization, the sodium channels will close and the potassium channels will be left open. When potassium channels are left open, it will result to more potassium going out of the cell, leaving only negative proteins inside of the cell. So therefore, from being positive, from depolarization, positive siya, babalik na siya ulit ngayon sa negative. And that change is called repolarization. So take note of that process of your action potential. And that action potential, makikita nyo naman, it travels along the length of the axon. Okay? No. Okay? Until such time na makarating dun sa destination yung impulse. Okay? Now, ayan. So this is the summary of what we have just discussed. Okay. Ayan. Okay. Ito rin yun. No? This is uh, how an action potential travels along an axon. So as you can see, okay, when an action potential travels along the axon, okay, yung rapid exchange of ions, okay, succeedingly takes place throughout the length of the axon. Okay? Now, so when an axon is myelinated, just like what you see in the picture, wherein the axon is myelinated, it has myelin sheath that covers the length of the axon. When an axon is myelinated, not the entire length of the axon is covered by myelin sheath. Okay? There are nodes that are exposed pa rin. And those nodes na walang cover ng myelin sheath are called the nodes of Ranvier. Nodes yan, nodes. Nodes of Ranvier. Okay. When an axon is myelinated, the conduction of impulse or action potential is faster because there is no need to for action potential to take place along the entire length of the axon. The action potential will just have to jump from one node of Ranvier to another. As you can see, Ranvier pala, Ranvier. As you can see, action potential, hindi na kailangang dumaan dito sa myelinated because the myelin sheath serves to insulate these parts of the axon. So therefore, tatalo na lang yung action potential from one node of Ranvier to another. And that type of conduction, when an axon is myelinated, is called saltatory conduction. From the Latin word salta, meaning to jump. Mas mabilis ang conduction kapag saltatory. Okay? Although there are a few unmyelinated axons in our nervous system. Yun. Kaya lang, mas mabagal ang conduction nun. Ano? Okay? Hmm. So, kaya mas mabilis is because of the presence of myelin sheath. So therefore, the presence of myelin sheath functions to increase the conduction rate, no, or the conduction speed along the axon, no. It makes the conduction saltatory, which is faster. Okay? So therefore, when the myelin sheath is destroyed, no, nasira ang myelin sheath, no, in a there is a disease of the central nervous system that is called demyelination or demyelinating disease. Kapag nagkaroon ka ng demyelinating disease, there will be slower conduction of impulse in our nervous system. Okay? Now, the site where where neurons, no, communicate is called a synapse, no? It's called a synapse or a synapse, no? I want you to recall, our discussion about the neuromuscular junction, because the synapse or the neuromuscular junction is an example of a synapse. No? Recall our discussion about that because yun na rin yun, no? Yung neurophysiology of the neuromuscular junction is also the same as the physiology of a synapse where neurons communicate. It also has three main parts, if you will remember. Diba? You have the presynaptic terminal, the synaptic cleft, and the postsynaptic membrane. Diba? O, at saka yung mga parts na yan. Lahat yan, we already have discussed it in our discussion of the neuromuscular junction doon sa uh, uh, sa uh, muscular system. No? So it will be still included in our final exam. Okay? Okay. Now, but no, the main difference between the neuromuscular junction and the different synapses in our central nervous system is that in our neuromuscular junction, isa lang ang neurotransmitter doon. I hope you still remember that. And that is your acetylcholine. Ayan, no? Neuromuscular junction. Okay? No? In our nervous system, hindi lang acetylcholine ang neurotransmitter. You have norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, gamma-aminobutyric acid, glycine, and endorphins. Take note of the functions of this neurotransmitters, no? Based on the clinical example given in this table 8.2. Okay, so I will leave it to you to read this table, no, this summary, no, and I will also include this in our final examination. Okay? Okay. So, I will cut this recording and then para hindi masyadong mahaba yung recording, and then the part 2, no, will be the parts of the nervous system.